Hello there. Welcome to Just the Discs. We talk about Blu-rays here. And today I am talking about a couple Blu-rays from Sony. And one thing I'd like to point out is that both of these are pressed discs. They are not burn on demand. They are pressed official Blu-rays, which is nice because I know in the past I've picked up a few from Sony that were burned discs, but these are not, and they are both really neat discs because they both have commentaries, but I'll get into that, getting ahead of myself a little bit. So one of my favorite filmmakers since I was in college is John Sayles. I've talked about him here recently with the release of Lone Star. Lone Star getting a really nice Blu-ray 4K release from Criterion. And that movie to me was really significant. Like it, impacted me in a big way. I saw it several times in the theater, and it was around, I said this during my talk about Lone Star, but it was around the time of Pulp Fiction. It was a couple years after that, and I was sort of looking for my next Pulp Fiction. What's the next movie that's going to take the top of my head off, just really get me. And this was kind of that for me, because it was just a really significant, well-made mystery film with some cool transitions and a great ensemble cast and great writing. And so Lone Star was a big deal to me. And I'd been aware of Sayles a little bit before that, but that one really hooked me. And one of his films that had I didn't really see it until I'm trying to think. I might have seen it on VHS because that's part of the cool thing about this. Anyway, the movie is City of Hope. It's from 1991. It is after he's done Eight Men Out and Mate One, two of his great movies. I mean, he's also done Return of the Sea Arca 7, his first film, Leanna, and Baby It's You, which is another favorite of mine, as is The Brother from Another Planet. Now, Baby It's You has a Blu-ray. Brother from Another Planet does not. Mate One, Eight Men Out, they have Blu-rays. He followed this film with Passion Fish. And anyway, this one has not had a release on a physical format since the VHS and Laserdisc release, which would have been around, early 1990s. I would guess. I'm not exactly sure when those were issued, but it has been available to stream, so you can't see it if you know where to seek it out. But in terms of a physical release, this is the first one since that. So that's really exciting to me because, like I said, Sayles is a real significant American icon kind of filmmaker, and this is one of his best films. And because I think, in part, its lack of availability, this one's been a little bit more forgotten. And I really am excited about this release, and the initial announcement of the Blu-ray itself was enough for me to be like, oh, that's going to be a big one for me this year. And then when I thought it was only a bare bones release, I discovered, no, this actually has a commentary from John Sayles himself, which is great. He does a lot of commentaries on a lot of his discs, and they're always fantastic. I love John Sayles commentaries. They're like Scorsese commentaries to me. They're just nuts and bolts about filmmaking and character and writing. And like I said, this is one of his best movies, so it was really exciting to hear him talk about it. The story is basically of a city in New Jersey. It's not a specific city. It's called Hudson City, I think, but it's modeled after maybe a couple other cities, and Sayles talks about those in the commentary. But it is following a large ensemble cast. Some of these actors he'd worked with before, and some he hadn't. But Vincent Spano plays Nick Rinaldi. Vincent Spano had been in Baby It's You with him, and Nick is a disillusioned contractor's son, and his wealthy father is played by Tony LoBianco, who I don't think had worked with Sayles before. So they're father and son, and he's become disillusioned with his life. He's actually currently working a job where he just doesn't have to do anything. He just shows up on a construction site and gets paid because his dad's got the bid on the building. And he's suddenly like, you know what? No, I don't want to do this anymore. And come to find out that he had an older brother who was in the military, and that's sort of looming over him. And he's just in a place in his life where he wants some change. And that's sort of the catalyst to take us through this entire city and its local government and law enforcement and the corruption that is involved in the government. So it's very much like The Wire. If you watch it, you can see how I've never heard David Simon specifically speak to this, but like you can't help but look at it and go, yeah, this is so much like The Wire, because it starts at the top and comes down sort of in a lot of ways through the local government to the citizens of the city, and then back up again and dealing with corruption and, again, the political machine of the city, basically. Joe Morton plays he's a local representative of government, and he's sort of, working with his constituency to try and continue to stay in office, but also to help them. And he's married to Angela Bassett, who I think had worked with Sayles before, and then would work with him again in Passion Fish, the next film he makes. But there's lots of characters in this, and lots of actors that you'll recognize. Frankie Faison, for instance, is in The Wire, which is another reason I have to believe that David Simon has seen this movie and was influenced by it. Todd Graff, who plays one of the folks in The Abyss, you'll recognize him. He's a friend of Vincent Spano's character. David Strathairn is in it. He's a regular in Sayles' work. He's in almost every Sayles film, and he plays sort of a mentally handicapped man who just sort of wanders the streets spouting television commercials and things like that. Kevin Tighe, you'll recognize. I remember him as Nick's dad from Freaks and Geeks, but he's a great character actor. He's in a ton of movies. Josh Mostel, Lawrence Tierney shows up for a minute in this movie. Chris Cooper shows up in this movie. Chris Cooper obviously would go on to do Lone Star with him, but he'd been in Mate 1 before that. And so just Sayles has a great eye and sense for certain actors, and just an incredible ability with dialogue and constructing this whole city and its mayor and what the mayor needs and how he's going to lean on Tony LoBianco's character for that, and that's going to affect Vincent Spano, and Vincent Spano trying to date a woman who is the ex-wife of a cop, and that's problematic. It just goes on, and it's just a really amazing ensemble portrait with a message, with an impact when you see it. And I really love this movie, and I was so excited that this Blu-ray got announced. So it's a beautiful 2:3:5:1 widescreen movie, right? And it's shot by the great Robert Richardson, who Tarantino's been working with lately, but who had shot JFK, and he's a very significant DP, and he's won Academy Awards. He shot Kill Bill. I want to say he shot Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but I have to double check. He did shoot into around this time, where it's really hot lights from overhead. It's sort of a halo effect, and it works really well with this movie. In fact, better with this movie than I think most other movies. I'm not saying it doesn't work in those other movies, but I found it to be really, really effective in terms of the style with this film and specifically, because a lot of the scenes take place outside at night with the street lights brightly shining down on the characters, and it really works, his style. So anyway, it's beautifully photographed. The Blu-ray looks great. The commentary is excellent. Sayles talks about all kinds of things in the track, from the characters to even like he's in the movie. That's a significant thing I should mention. I love Sayles as an actor too. I think he's a really great actor, and he plays a guy named Carl in this movie who runs an auto shop. He has a limp, and that comes into play later. We find out what that is about, but he's kind of a scumbag. He, is into local robbery schemes and into occasional insurance fraud with fires and things like that. And so he becomes involved in the plot at a point. But Sayles has got a really interesting angle on him, because he's like, this guy is a jerk, and his arc is that he stays a jerk throughout the whole movie. And he's like, that's easier for me as a director to play a character like that has no change throughout the course of the movie, because you're not shooting in sequence. So for other actors, you have to kind of remember, where am I in the arc of this character at a certain point in the movie where we're shooting. But Carl, once a jerk, always a jerk, stays the same. He's a character type, and Sayles does to play those kinds of characters, a persona, as it were, better, because he doesn't have to think about changing the arc throughout. And he's really good. Like, he's a really good jerk. And there's tons of great dialogue in this, just smart alecky dialogue between the different characters. And it's some of my favorite Sayles dialogue, and he's a great writer of dialogue. But yeah, fantastic movie. This is, for me, like one of my favorite releases of 2024 so far. With that commentary included, that knocks it up to being a favorite of the year, because it really is such a great film and has been needing a Blu-ray release for so long. And since it's coming from Sony, it's not going to get a lot of publicity. So I wanted to really make sure and emphasize how excited I am about this release. Could have been a Criterion. Criterion's been working with Sayles, and this is the kind of movie like Mate 1 and Lone Star that he's done that is just top tier stuff. I mean, the other movie I would compare it to maybe is Sunshine State, which is another movie I really like from him. It's not quite on the level of Lone Star and Mate 1 and stuff, but it's very similar in that it's about a city, in this case in Florida, and the government and the people, and you could do these as a double. It'd be really an interesting double bill. And I think that has a Blu-ray. I think Sunshine State has a Blu-ray. I'm not 100% sure on that, actually. I know I have a DVD of it, but anyway, maybe it doesn't actually. That one might need a Blu-ray. But this is a great Sayles film, fantastic release, looks wonderful, pressed disc, not a burn disc, and absolutely worth your time. Just a great film. Okay, so moving on, another Sony release, a very different film from the one I just spoke about, from City of Hope. This is You'll Never Get Rich from 1981. Now, this is a Fred Astaire musical, and it co-stars Rita Hayworth, a very young, I think 22-year-old Rita Hayworth. And it is, while it's not quite up there with Swing Time and Top Hat, the Ginger Rogers musicals, it's pretty solid, and a movie that I had not seen before. So this is the first Blu-ray for this movie, and part of that is because of Rita Hayworth, who I'm obviously a fan of, but what I didn't know is that she was brought up by her father. There's a sad story behind her relationship with her father, apparently, but to be a dancer. And she took dancing lessons and found her way into the movies. And that's covered in this has an excellent commentary track, which I'll get to in a second. But she's really good, and she goes toe-to-toe with Fred Astaire, and it's great to see them dancing together. They have such a great chemistry and energy together. And basically, Fred Astaire is, as he often was, he's playing a guy who's in a Broadway show. He's the choreographer, dancer. He's in the show. He's choreographing the show. Rita Hayworth is a young dancer that the owner of the theater slash, the guy who's bankrolling the play, is played by Robert Benchley, who I guess was like a humorist or something, like a writer and humorist, and he's very funny in this. In fact, just an aside, like the movie opens with one of the more interesting credit sequence I've ever seen, because it's him in the back of his like limo. This is Robert Benchley, and he pulls up to a row of like street signs. He's like, "Hey, driver, slow down for a second. I want to get a look at this." And they cut out the window, and then the credits are done entirely in street signs and billboards along the side of this country road. And I'm like, that's a really clever conceit. And then he's like, when the credits are done, he's like, "Oh, okay, let's go." And he shows up at the theater, and then things kind of kick off. But this movie opens real quick with a dance number. It has several beautiful dance numbers. Some that, are not quite Busby Berkeley-esque, but they have some pretty significant sets, including a set that was apparently built as Grand Central Station. So, you couldn't film. It would be hard to film in Grand Central Station at this time, although they do mention in the commentary that Terry Gilliam did it years later with The Fisher King, has a dance sequence filmed in Grand Central Station. But this is a really nice set of Grand Central Station that comes up later. And there's another even bigger, not bigger set, but like a big set with like a giant tank that they're dancing on and stuff like that. That's at the end of the movie. So lots of good dance numbers. It's a classic Fred Astaire plot where Robert Benchley's character really likes Rita Hayworth. The beginning of the movie, we see him buying her a diamond bracelet. He's buying a diamond bracelet, and the joke is that he's like, "Oh, I should get something for my wife too." And you're like, "Oh, wait a minute, what?" And he has the bracelet engraved with Rita Hayworth's name on it. Her name is Sheila. And he gets his wife like a Chinese back scratcher or something because it's their 15th anniversary. So he goes back to the building where the play is, the theater, and he gets in trouble with his wife because he tries to give Rita Hayworth the necklace or the bracelet. It's a diamond bracelet, beautiful diamond bracelet. But she quietly sneaks it back into his pocket. So when his wife comes in, he's like, "Oh, I got you a present. Check my pocket." She finds the bracelet engraved to her, to Sheila. And immediately it becomes a thing where Robert Benchley's character goes to Fred Astaire. He's like, "You have to help me out. I told my wife that I bought the diamond bracelet with Sheila's name on it for you because you're into her." And he's like, "What?" And at the time, he hadn't really thought about it, but we hear behind the scenes that actually Rita Hayworth kind of likes Fred Astaire, and she's making mistakes in the dance because she wants him to bring her out and dance with her and show her the proper way to dance and stuff. And so it becomes a will they, won't they kind of romance where there continues to be misunderstandings that get in the way of Fred Astaire, and Rita Hayworth getting together right up to the end of the movie. I've always found this kind of conceit a tiny bit frustrating because it's just a simple matter of explaining things, and at some point somebody does by the end of the film, and then things are okay. But what's interesting about this is it starts as this, classic Fred Astaire setup. He's a choreographer in this show, and then he gets drafted, and it becomes a military comedy. And what's interesting about that too is that it's, as I understand it from the commentary, it's coming out before the U.S. involvement in the war, before Pearl Harbor in 1941. So it's very like, let's do it for Uncle Sam, gung-ho kind of, upbeat stuff. But, we're not, the United States isn't in the war yet. And I think that's interesting. But yeah, I didn't expect it to take that turn and become this military comedy for, a good half the movie, if not more. Fred Astaire is getting himself in trouble and ending up in the brig, which is like a giant room where he can dance around, basically. But anyway, it's a super fun, sweet and romantic and just well choreographed, wonderful comedy, and I really enjoyed it. And the commentary, I think I've heard this gentleman before, but his name is Stephen C. Smith. And he's a documentary film producer and an author who I guess has made several films about dancers specifically. And he has previously interviewed the likes of Gene Kelly, Sid Charisse, Donald O'Connor, and others. And so he knows his stuff. And he goes into deep detail about the making of this film and its sort of significance to Columbia Pictures, its significance to the careers of both Rita Hayworth and Fred Astaire. He gives background on all the major players. This is a big breakout role for Rita Hayworth. And it's just a great commentary overall. It's one of those like wall to wall, like he doesn't pause much, and he's very well prepared. He's got a lot to say. And this is just a slight aside for me that I enjoyed, but his voice and his cadence reminds me just slightly of Robert Osborne's. And I always love those TCM Robert Osborne intros and the way that he speaks in those. And this guy's voice is a little bit like that. So there was kind of like a pleasing feeling to that, a pleasing nostalgic TCM feeling to it. But like I said, really well put together commentary with lots of information, very much like taking a class. And so I really enjoyed the track. So really nice release. If you're a fan of Fred Astaire or Rita Hayworth, you will enjoy this. It is a great dance movie and well worth picking up. Great to see it finally on Blu-ray. So anyway, that will do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.